Hey, it's Josiah. On today's episode of Fruitless, I was joined by Gaius from the YouTube channel Tribunate. Tribunate is an educational channel focused on the history of Rome from a left-wing perspective. Outside of the channel, Gaius has been a mutual of mine on social media for years now. He's an incredibly insightful guy with a lot of historical knowledge. On today's episode, Gaius joined me to discuss Roman history and its parallels to the present. Is the US in a decline similar to the end of the Roman Republic, or perhaps the Roman Empire? Is that even a useful comparison at all? We get into that, as well as, a discussion on why fascists and online groypers are so obsessed with Rome. This is a super fun one, and I'm really glad Gaius got a chance to join me. But before we dive into the episode, a few things I need to bring up quickly. First, I wanted to tell you about something that friends of the show, Kim Hensley and Chris Barker, have brought to my attention. The National Association of Letter Carriers, which is the AFL-CIO affiliated unions for USPS postal workers, is doing a food drive on May 10th. This is nationwide for anyone living in the US, to my knowledge. So on that day, letter carriers will be picking up any non-perishable foods you put out by your mailbox and delivering them to nearby food banks, pantries, shelters, etc. This is a really easy way to help people stay fed during what is a bit of an uncertain time for the country economically, so consider buying some non-perishable food to leave by your mailbox. At the very least, if you have some canned stuff you don't think you'll be eating anytime soon, this is a way to know it's not being wasted. Second, I need to say that you can support this show on Patreon. For a mere $3 a month, you get access to additional bonus episodes, access to the Fruitless Discord, and the occasional deleted scene from full-length episodes. Recent episodes have included a discussion of Harmony Korine's film Spring Breakers with Alien and Josh Christensen, a discussion of my recent conversion to being a sports guy with Nathan Thiessen, as well as some new installments of The Music Exchange, a series where Josh Christensen and I exchange an album that we find personally meaningful and then compare and contrast them. If you're not quite ready to support the show financially, just consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out with the algorithm, and I may read the review at the top of an episode. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get on with the episode and talk about Rome. You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 61. Return to Rome, featuring Gaius from Tribunate, and return spelled with a V. It's like that. And I will say, hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Fruitless. I am joined today by the only Roman history YouTuber who isn't a Hitlerite. It's Gaius from Tribunate. Hello, guys.
Hello. Happy to be here, and unhappy to be one of like 6 people who talk about Rome online who is not a Hitlerite. So...
I always really appreciate that whenever I watch your videos, because it's like such a minefield trying to watch like any ancient history YouTube stuff.
Yeah, like you watch something that's from like a very respected professor who's like detailing, oh, here's what archaeology can tell us about the development of material culture in 2nd century Gaul. And then like the next thing YouTube recommends is be like, why the Gauls deserved it. You know, like it's like, what? Like, no, I wanted to learn.
What if genocide is good?
Yeah. It's like, I wanted to know more about, their material culture, actually. I wasn't really interested in learning why they all deserved to die, but thank you. Oh, cool. It's from Keck Hitler 14. Great channel. Thanks for recommending that, YouTube.
Well, for people who do not watch Tribunate, what is it? Who are you?
Yes, Tribunate is basically a channel that focuses on the history of Rome, more or less the 200 years on either side of year 0. So from 200 BCE to 200 CE. Dabble in stuff earlier than that and later than that, of course, but that's kind of like the wheelhouse. And I think that's the most interesting era. But it's also, I think, unfortunately, one of the things that makes the channel unique is that it is one of the, I think, the only places that is a consistently left-wing approach to classical history, outside of like academic literature. Because I think a lot of the stuff that I do say is very well represented in the academy is basically academic convention, but then pop history will be about, venerating these figures very uncritically without reflecting on, did the great man achieve this because he was inherently great or because he had 1,000 slaves who were doing all the actual menial labor for him, right?
Yeah, was it maybe structural?
Yeah, did just out of chance, did a guy like Augustus, who was born into like enormous wealth and privilege, not saying he wasn't a smart or capable individual, but like, do you think by chance him being born into one of the most politically well-connected families and, his uncle or his great uncle literally being Julius Caesar maybe helped his career a tad? So unfortunately, a lot of people aren't willing to like engage with that and will just be like, oh no, he was epic, he was based, he was cool, and I guess the vantage point that we come from is basically like, not trying to be too overly critical just to take pot shots, but a lot of the stuff is critical of like that pop history reading of
it's critical,
Rome,
but it's not clickbaity. It's not like, here's why Julius Caesar sucked, actually 10 facts.
Top 5 reasons, right? Yeah. So I guess if I had to sum it up, it would basically be like taking what has been conventional wisdom within the academy into the pop history sphere, where it can that kind of more nuanced approach just isn't rewarded by YouTube. So it's kind of a grind, but I've found that the people who like it really like it, and the people who hate it really hate it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really high quality. Again, with my experience of history YouTubers, it's definitely, above the norm.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think it's important work to do, because I think in general, not just with Rome, but especially with Rome, there is kind of a general great man history that, theory that dominates, popular history. While in the academy, it's a lot of the academies that got usually a lot more complicated of a view of any given historical subject. But most people's understanding of history comes from a very I don't know. I've jokingly called it epic rap battles understanding of history.
Yeah, I think that's just the way things are, because on platforms like YouTube, it's the lowest common denominator gets rewarded. I mean, like, I think folks, it's that way for not just history, but really, I think like any genre of content, it's always, I mean, that's why everybody makes the Mr. Beast faced, right, in their thumbnails, and it's like, that's the one thing I've like sworn an oath to never do, is it's like, I don't care if it would reward me like exponentially. It's like, I'm not, I think it is like, I won't say it's like serious work or that I'm like breaking any new ground that people have never, tread before, but it's also like, I respect the material too much, and I respect like the actual living past. Like, I recognize them all as like real humans, which informs a lot of my work, and I don't want to just cheapen it by, doing like epic sex, Roman orgies, gladiator bloodshed, that kind of stuff.
No, and I think what helps is you talking about subjects that already people are naturally interested in. Everybody. I mean, we had a couple. I don't know. Internet time is weird, but in the last few years, there was the kind of meme of like the My Roman Empire, men always thinking about the Roman Empire, whatever. It's kind of a thing people already seek out a lot, especially people who consider themselves like amateur history buffs. And I think it's good that you're out there having those videos that people will like maybe actually learn from, rather than just, I don't know, repeat pop wisdom.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it is kind of like a tactical thing for me, because like, I'm obviously very interested in politics as it were, but like the decision was, there's people talking about politics out there. There's good political channels on YouTube, of course, but I felt like history was one place where it's like, I can actually sneak in a lot of Marxism and people won't notice it. If it's just like, if it's like, because if I was talking about like, oh, why the Russian Revolution, maybe is more complicated than like your PragerU video would tell you, people will recognize, oh, that's a communist. But if it's like why I'm talking about like why Roman society was more complicated than a PragerU video would tell you. People are like, oh, it is. And it's like, I got you. You're on the hook now. So,
but you do get, I did want to bring this up toward the beginning was, your social media is often you sharing YouTube comments you get. You do get a lot of like psychos.
Yeah, I don't share them all because I don't see them all, but it's also like the ones that I just like really treasure, the ones that are very special to me, I will post on Blue Sky. Because it's like, some people will, I think like one I posted today was I did a video on Cato the Younger, who's, a venerated figure among conservatives as kind of like this standout principled, conservative
kind of the
figure.
Arch nemesis of the channel, I've gathered as well.
I've gone after him a few times. The ultimate goal is to really knock him down a peg, and maybe if I'm sure I won't be able to make conservatives stop loving him, but at least make liberals stop being like, oh well, Cato was a principled man. We need good conservatives like that. It's like, no, he sucked. But I did do a video. I did a video on him, and like somebody commented it today and was like, this really reminds me of how illegal immigrants sneak into the country and demand citizenship. And I'm like, how the fuck did you get that? Like, man. This is straight up communist propaganda that you're watching, and you somehow took away from that I was in any way like pro deportation of immigrants. No, I'm pro deportation of like you guys. I want more illegal immigrants. Like,
more immigrants.
Yeah. So anyway, but it's stuff like that. The stuff that's like, if it's just a normal conservative being like, I disagree, whatever, that's not fun. But the stuff that's legitimately unhinged, which, it's YouTube. The comments there are a gold mine. You meet some of the most unique, special people, beautiful minds at work in the YouTube comments on any video, but on politically charged stuff, it's something else.
Well, I kind of wanted to have you on to just talk broadly about, I guess your channel's interest is kind of this intersection of leftist politics and Roman history, and I guess that's kind of what I'm interested in right now, is because we are living in the last few months anyway, last few years, we've had a real sense of like people really feeling like we're living through a decline going on with the United States. And, that naturally brings up these parallels to the fall of Rome or whatever. I think it's fun to kind of interrogate that and see to what extent Rome does shed some light on our current predicament, and to what extent that's just, really trying to stretch history to match the present.
I think that it's interesting because like you kind of pick and choose like which decline and fall of Rome are you talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
There were a lot. And so like I think that gives people the flexibility to find like certain, this first one doesn't work, or like the decline from republic into empire doesn't fit my ideological agenda. So I'll go with the collapse of the Western Empire in like 476. That's the one I'll choose. And so like there's this there's an inherent flexibility there of like, it rose and it fell and it revived itself like multiple times. So you have so much flexibility that makes it politically useful for these kind of tailor-made arguments. But I think like one of the areas where I'm most interested in is the collapse of the Republic into the Principate. So that would be the generation of like of Cicero, of Cato, of Julius Caesar transitioning into like Mark Antony and Augustus, and somewhere kind of hard to pin down exactly where, depending on how you define the Republic, it's lost. And there is this system that was deeply flawed, but it did have some electoral input, which is a good thing, despite its deep flaws, is lost to a system of one man rule that is essentially monarchy. So I find that decline and fall more interesting and, more politically relevant, I think, to what we have now, where like a deeply flawed system exists that I think I would like to see upended, but not in the way that it is currently being upended, right? Like, so it's like the deeply flawed structure, the on its surface level democratic, on its surface level talks about citizen rights and equality and those things for the citizen body, at least. Those superficial similarities are there, and those kind of gradually getting eroded. I think it's not unfair, I think, to make comparisons between like that era of Republican decline and our current era of, Republican dominance in America.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that is a subject we return to a lot because the fall of the Roman Republic or the, transition into the Roman Empire is, the earliest example of the collapse of something resembling a democratic system. Obviously, all the caveats there that it was a very, very much not a democracy, but, something resembling a democratic system eventually caving into dictatorship in some way, autocracy in some way. And it's the oldest example we have with the amount of records we have of it, because I'm sure there's many cases. Well, I think
you could draw parallels with like Athens had a similarly like a deeply flawed democratic system that like collapsed and revived and was back and was dead again, and it eventually succumbs to like external pressures, I guess, which makes it less relevant to like Rome, which kind of eats itself alive, as opposed to Athens, just never being the big dog on the street that the U.S. or Rome were. So, yeah, I think that one of the interesting through lines, and I don't want to draw comparisons or like parallels where they shouldn't exist, but something that I've kept seeing in the research is how, it seemed that in Rome, the Republic ate itself alive because it was so militarily successful, because it kept expanding, and it eventually had to transform. And so it had an old constitution that was designed for a city-state, not a continent-spanning empire, which I think is kind of like us having an antiquated constitution written, in an age before like nuclear weapons, for example, which are kind of a big deal, or like any number of things, the internet, electricity, right?
Yeah, right.
So any number of things, like it was a system of rules in place for a different world, and one of the things the Romans did was they kind of just instead of, having a big convention type thing where they said, okay, well, listen, we want this. We were obviously governing more territory. We need to reevaluate how we appoint people to these positions, we ensure that the folks who are in power are directly accountable to like a broader swath of people. That never happens. And so essentially these compromises that they make to ensure that they're able to exploit their empire of investing power in individuals to command armed forces like within these provinces, to kind of govern as like petty kings for a year or 2 years in these provinces and then come home with all the money they've expropriated. That system kind of causes a feedback loop where everyone notices, oh, that's incredibly lucrative. I need to get my own army, get stationed to Greece or Syria or some province or Spain, and I want to rob the people there. And so then politics becomes more competitive because winning those electoral battles to get those offices, there's a higher reward. And, so more of the elite go into debt. They're spending more on their campaigns. And to me, there's like a direct parallel with kind of the war on terror kind of driving us insane, of us just gradually giving away, constitutional norm after constitutional norm. Oh, it's okay if we do this. We can give up that. We have to stay safe. We have to, the president needs the ability to declare war unilaterally now. We can't let Congress do that anymore. Like those sorts of things, I think, the Roman Empire was born out of the Republic, but the Republic already had an empire. If you understand what I'm saying. Like,
well, actually,
its desire to keep its own empire resulted in like that imperial blowback coming home is, I guess, one of the primary theses of the channel. And eventually the city of Rome and its citizens are governed in the same manner as it had been treating its its provincial subjects.
Yeah, this kind of answers a question I had kind of to ask is to what extent does the U.S. parallel the Roman Republic versus the Roman Empire? Because, I was thinking very literally there that the U.S. is both a republic and an empire. But I think you did kind of answer that there because, the Republic was an empire. It wasn't as big of an empire as it would eventually become, but it was an empire. And I really appreciated one of the videos you did, I think semi recently, that, you know, kind of gets into what you were just saying of like, you used Foucault's boomerang as a reference point for how much the slow deterioration of the Republic was the result very much of the thing that was also keeping the Republic alive, was these imperial campaigns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that was the video about like the Pyrrhic victory of like the Macedonian War, and like it's like they were so excited to have won this great war and all this wealth comes in, and it's like, oh, actually that's massively destabilizing, and you know, it kind of got the ball rolling with this incredible competition for offices that we see. And like, you know, that's why you have somebody like Caesar, who is born into an aristocratic family, not like a particularly wealthy one, but like one of the top patrician families in Rome, and he just goes massively into debt to finance all of his campaigns because he's like, there's no other way. Like, I don't have the resources, and so that means like, you know, when you owe that much money to that many people, you don't really have a choice when you go out to the provinces but to govern like an asshole, basically, and take bribes from whoever you can and sell anyone into slavery that you can so that you can pay back your creditors and hopefully, you know, come away with a little more on the top. So, yeah. And, you know, I think one area I haven't really explored, I think there's probably room to talk about it further, would be to say, like, you know, you could draw a parallel with how absurdly expensive American campaigns are becoming, where to run a presidential campaign, I think it was like the Harris campaign is spent over $1 billion, I believe, you know, and then the Trump one, I'm sure it was similar, but that's all like behind 75 layers of like obfuscation and like weird crypto stuff, and just the fact that like Republicans don't really have to follow the law. So I'm sure a ton of stuff was never disclosed, but you know, it's like, well, when you need $1 billion, it's like you and I can chip in 20, 30, 40, but like you're gonna have to make promises to a bunch of rich, well-connected people if you want, you know, a $2 million check from, you know, some high-placed tech executive, right? So, you know, it's like, who are you at that point? Like, even if you do have a good intentions, who can you really govern for? Yeah,
I'm glad you brought up this debt and the financial side of Rome, because that was something I've had on my mind because of an episode of Fruitless I did back in October. That was with a couple friends about the book And Forgive Them Their Debts by Michael Hudson, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it. But it's about Bronze Age debt practices, and it, you know, toward the end it eventually lands on Rome. It's so good because it
sounds good.
It's great. Yeah, because it's making the argument of like, where does the concept of the Jubilee year in the Bible actually come from? And it goes back to like you know, Sumer, and really far back. And what is his general thesis throughout it is that the idea of debt forgiveness was kind of built into these, you know, these monarchical structures, you know, not out of like moral desire or whatever, but it was a effective way to keep some sort of like an oligarchy or aristocracy from forming, because, you know, debt collecting and being a creditor was how they were sucking away power away from the crown. And, you know, what he kind of goes on to say is he frames Rome as entirely a creditor oligarchy in how it functioned. And, you know, I think you could see kind of what you were describing there in that sense, right? Is you see like, you know, the state's capacity is constantly getting drained by the fact that it is eventually owing all these rich benefactors money to have a military, to have whatever.
Yeah. I think that's one of the interesting things about the Republic, or like even up until the end, is that like, and I think one of the reasons, like, if you want to look at it from like a purely materialist perspective of like why it had to become the empire it did, like to maintain its holdings, was because they did not have a bureaucracy. This was all like all the tax collecting, like you see it in the Bible, like all the tax collecting is done by, you know, it's outsourced third party folks, because they didn't have a bureaucracy, because they didn't have like a standing, there was no state really, like no permanent bureaucratic institutions that survived from like long term, and because they were unwilling to like entrust that power to any single individual. So like, oh, if I don't trust that guy with it, nobody gets it, right? So you know, and then the emperor emerges and kind of is like, okay, well, I'm here for the long haul, and I'm going to appoint a bunch of guys from like undistinguished backgrounds so that they'll completely owe the position to me and staff the bureaucracy that way. So like, yeah, there is I think a lot to be said about the fact that like the financial drive and the necessity of like a coherent financial system is kind of what drove imperial consolidation further.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving kind of away from the creditor's side and toward maybe more of a silly current event thing. But one thing you had mentioned when we were DMing about this episode was wanting to talk a little bit about the whole kerfuffle around the Roman salute. I'm doing air quotes there. Why don't we dive into that real quick?
Yeah, happily. Well, it's like it's funny because like it's like as far as I know, and like granted, I haven't looked into it like super recently, but it's like I saw a bunch of people defending Musk by saying, "Oh, it was a Roman salute," but as far as I never saw him say that. I saw him just him just kind of being like, "Oh no, I was just like pointing." Like I don't
my heart goes out to you is the thing.
My heart goes out to you. I don't believe, and so the cover was obviously, oh, it was just a Roman salute. Which, you know, we can get into that in a minute. But as far as I know, he never walked it back and said that's what it was. But as to the point of like it being a quote unquote Roman salute, that's kind of a whole can of worms because it's like we have like I think one or two depictions of Roman soldiers doing a hand up, hand raised salute. But like there's no way to know this. Like, was that the start, the end, the middle? Like, right? Like, we don't have anything on video, right? Like, and the depictions are like rare, and it's also like it's not referenced in literature to where some guys like, and they all saluted Mark Antony by raising their hands in the customary fashion. Like, we don't have a primary source detailing that, and obviously we don't have like video evidence of them doing it. So it's like we don't know like were they waving both hands and then once like so anyway, like I guess the point I would make is like there's a lot of uncertainty around if that was truly a widespread standardized salute. What is not doubted is that it has its like direct roots in like Mussolini revived it because he was like a weeb for the Roman Empire basically. Like he you know he was so mad about like how shit Italy was like at that time that he was like, actually we're the Romans, you know, and then like it clearly gets adopted by fascism. So it's like there's not a whole lot of, I think it does not require too much like mental legwork to be like, no, I think he meant something else by that, right? Yeah. And especially like, I don't know, it just, but it does just kind of go into like, and I think, and it's also the dishonesty of like, because I think everyone who called it a Roman salute knew exactly what it was. So like, I don't need to.
They were obfuscating for sure.
Yeah, I don't need to spend, you know, people ask me to do a video on it. It's like, I don't need to do the research, do the writing when no one is actually making that case in good faith. Like everybody knows exactly what it really was, and they're calling it a Roman salute because they know maybe in 3 or 4 years we can get away with saying what it is, but like right now we're gonna have to call it something else. So but it also just kind of reflects like the shoddy scholarship that kind of like animates that whole weird right Roman like revivalist return to tradition crowd.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we could talk about those freaks if you'd like.
Yeah, I was gonna go that direction. Okay, but I was gonna say like, yeah, I think that calling it a Roman salute always struck me as kind of funny because I mentally think of how many fascist movements are like pointing to Rome usually anyway, or like, you know, arguing for the case of like a dictator coming and fixing a republic that seems in decline as, you know, Caesarian, you know, we need our Caesar, our great man, you know, so it always felt kind of like a silly argument to me, to like a silly obfuscation, because it's like, yeah, I mean, our fascists are cosplaying as Romans all the time. Okay, it's a Roman salute, fine. That's still that. But yeah, no, I would like to kind of dive into a little bit too, like, why do you think Rome specifically is, you know, where so many fascist movements or, you know, modern day, like online return freaks, you know, like why do they all go back to Rome? What's so special about Rome?
I think that one of the reasons they go back to Rome is simply just because it's so easy to create like a false image of it or a image that suits your own preferences, you know, to to kind of see it through your own. We know enough to know that how much we don't know is something I say a lot. And but so you can create like a very compelling picture and be like almost there and be relying on a lot of like actual real historical evidence, but you have to ignore a lot to get there. And so, you know, a lot of these guys can be like, oh, look at this, Tacitus said that, or Plutarch said this, like, ergo Rome was conservative, like white male utopia. But it's like, no, it wasn't, you know, like, but I think that they really just want to envision a society that was incredibly ordered and incredibly, which is true. It was a very hierarchical society. It was a very patriarchal society. And those are things that they really like and things that they would really like to have back. But where they're wrong is to kind of interpret it as through a lens of whiteness, you know, because the Romans did not have near the same like racial conceptions that we did. There was bigotry and like some quasi things akin to racism occurring, of course, but it was not like there were no like racial castes, and like slavery was practiced on a widespread basis, but they would enslave someone from Africa and someone from Gaul. They did not give a shit. They did not. Yeah, it
wasn't racialized.
Right. An Italian person wouldn't have been like, oh, well, this white Gaul is closer to me than the black African or the person from Palestine. Like they never would have thought that. There was not like a conceptualized hierarchy going on. And so the hierarchical stuff is true. It was very based on like, you know, wealth, status, prestige, and you kind of being subservient to those above, quote unquote, above you on the social ladder. And women had a very shit run of it for the entire duration of Rome. But so they're right about those things, but where they're wrong is it's like they want to, it's like, it was a pretty gay place. Like, you know, and you don't have to, and like, that's the thing that gets me is it's like you don't have to go digging for that, right? Like, it's not like this was unearthed in 1999 in like an obscure paper and like it's only now making its way into like the discourse. It's like, no, like like pretty much like, you know, even emperors themselves were like Hadrian and Trajan, like two of the most successful emperors were gay. They had wives, but like it was like, okay, I'll do that if I have to, but like I like guys. So, you know, and it's and I did a video on like why that I think it would also be a mistake for people on the left to paint it as like a tolerant gay paradise, because it certainly was not. Like there was
it wasn't a great sexual arrangement.
No,
it wasn't particularly liberatory either.
Like there was like you know, men and men being together, women and women being together was not as that other one was not as normal, but like men and men, you know, but there was a class dynamic where it was like a guy from an upper class could be the dominant partner to a male from the lower class, and there was stigma of reversing those roles. So like, anyway, not to get too far down that path, but anyway, but that's just something that the right would totally just say, oh, that doesn't count. Why doesn't it count? Oh, because I don't want it to, you know. But there's a lot of aspects of the society, and like it's funny because it's always like these trad Catholics who are like, oh, return. It's like, bro, they were killing Christians for a long time. Like, you know, it's like how is based Marcus Aurelius 88 like talking about return to tradition and like let's be trad cats, and it's like, dude, Marcus Aurelius like killed Christians. Like, you know, are you not? He would not have liked you. Let's just put it that way.
This is kind of like an ongoing thing I do always kind of wonder about, or it's something I'm always interested in, because I think there's a contradiction in conservative Christian love for Rome, because on the one hand, there's a reason they have that, because yes, Rome after Constantine was, you know, this force that spread Christianity around Europe, but also like a lot of the like period of Roman history that I think like most people think of when they think of Rome was all the stuff that was oppressing Christianity.
Yeah.
All the stuff that killed Christ.
Yeah. Well, they blame the Jews for that.
Right.
And it's like, which is like, okay, well, I guess you don't have you've never really had a problem with ignoring the Bible, but you know, I guess you're doing that again. But like, yeah, exactly. Cause certainly with Constantine, in the 4th century, the empire converts, and it kind of spends its last like 100 odd years of the West, and then of course the Eastern Roman Empire, different story, but like the last 100 odd years of the West, it is a Christian empire. But yeah, when people think Rome, they don't think of that last kind of tail end where it is a Christian society. They think of it as a society where it's very pagan. And I've done a lot of my work has focused on like how you cannot extract that pagan philosophy, that inherently polytheistic framework of viewing reality from how they viewed life, but also how the government functioned. Like, I think in the modern West, it's like there's church and there's state and like they're separate entities, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but like I also go to work for 8 hours a day, and like I don't really do Christian stuff there. I think like to a Roman there was no, and this even goes into the Christian era just because of how the ancient mind worked differently, but like there was no like non-religious aspect of life. So it's not something that can be like quickly delineated or like explained away as like, oh, they were actually based pagans and they meant to be Christians, but they weren't. You know.
Yeah. Do you want to say a little more about like, what was kind of intrinsic about, Roman paganism to how it functioned, on that like system? I mean, obviously, like you said, there was no real distinction between the religious sphere and the public sphere or whatever, but I don't know. Is there ways in which like the adoption of Christianity had to like fundamentally restructure Rome?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you can notice that it kind of took a while, because in the initial Christian writings, they don't talk about like Jupiter or Apollo as fake. They're like, oh, those are demons. Because I think even to the Christians, the first Christians, it's like, oh, well, clearly they're real. Like people have been praying to him for so long, and like stuff happens when they pray to him. So it's like they're real, but like they're not God. So ergo, like they're demons. They're tricks by the devil. Like, so I think that's an interesting thing that like you can look at as understanding of just how pervasive this atmosphere of belief was, that when a truly unique and for the first time, like I guess Judaism existed and was a competitive religious like framework, but it was not as evangelical, not the modern word, but like it was not as universal in its scope or like missionary in its orientation.
It was the belief system of a very small group in the periphery of the empire. Yeah. Right.
And people adopted it, and like people venerated the Jewish God who were not of that culture, but like it was not, there was no like from day one like Christianity has been missional, whereas Judaism just wasn't at the time. So, but yeah, you look at it and it's like these people adopting it, and like they could have grown up pagan, and they're like, oh well, like Jupiter is totally real, Minerva is totally real. I guess I was praying to a demon, and I'll repent to that. So I think that just testifies to just how embedded like the belief structures were, that even like when Christianity for the first time makes like truly countervailing religious claims, because previously if you had just been like, oh, I'm dissatisfied worshiping Apollo or Ceres, it's like, well, I'll pick up Dionysius. I'll start going to his stuff instead. Like you didn't like say they didn't exist or they had no power or they were bad. It was just like, oh, they're not really doing it for me. They're not, Castor and Pollux are not answering my prayers. So I'm doing the LeBron thing, and I'm taking my business to I'm taking my business to South Beach and doing Mithras instead. So yeah, I think that is a really interesting thing that I just wish I had more time to like research and write about, because I think it testifies to how ingrained religious belief was in like every aspect of society, because they're like just so fundamentally religious in ways that we find hard to comprehend as moderns, because it's like an all-encompassing aspect of their lives in a way that, philosophy was religion. Those weren't separate things. Like, your marriage was like consecrated by the gods in a way that like even people who are married in religious ceremonies today don't quite view it that way. Right. Yeah. I mean,
even, I'm speaking more in a Greek context, but I know even like, the Greek mindset was like that, math was a religious thing. Like, it was all,
Pythagoras and
Yeah, it's all, one thing in a way that, I think we've kind of fractured it. We don't quite see it in that way.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of like interesting literature about that now from like even modern, like just from a philosophy or theological standpoint. But yeah, like you have Paul when he's like trying to talk to the Greeks and he's saying like he doesn't get up there and say like, oh, your gods aren't real, but he says like, oh, you have an altar to an unknown god. That's who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I think I forget the name of the pagan poet he quotes, but he even quotes one is like, in whom we live and move and have our being. That's a line of like pagan poetry, and he's like, but that works, that's true. So, yeah, I don't know what Paul's personal beliefs were because he didn't say like, directly, but I think he would have adopted like that early Christian standpoint of like, oh, well, they're real, but they're demons and we don't want to talk to them. We want to worship the real God.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, do you think the polytheistic structure of the Roman Empire more conducive to the kind of, I don't know, style of empire they were doing? Because, I mean, I guess I don't know to what extent was like forced conversion a thing under pagan Rome. Sorry, the reason I'm asking that. So like, was the polytheism like a way of kind of dealing with, you conquer a region and it has its own local deities or whatever, and you just kind of incorporate it rather than, forced conversion?
Yeah, because I think, well, even before, like, because Rome would have had contacts and done trade, and like, they would have known who these people were. They would have known what gods they worshipped, but like, they always had a very kind of openness, and this was pervasive across the entire like Mediterranean. It wasn't unique to Rome, of viewing gods as more or less analogous. So like, even the Carthaginians, who were their chief enemy, their primary god was Tanit, and the Romans would have been like, oh, that's Minerva, because it was a goddess of wisdom, a goddess of battle, and it's like, oh, that's Athena, that's Minerva, that's the same person. So like they were always like very open to that kind of interchange. And so what Romans actually did when they conquered a place was they would have a kind of religious ceremony outside the walls of a city they were about to seize and formally invite the gods to leave that place and come be worshipped in Rome. And they would say like, we'll build you a better temple. These people suck. We're more religious than they are. We'll give you more honors. And like, if you conquered them, that was the ancient way of being like, oh, well, I have the divine favor. So the goddess or the god has chosen us. And then they would build a temple. And like in their worldview, it might sound like very contrived to us, but it was very coherent to them to be like, by winning, we've proved that we had the divine favor, that they accepted, the god or the goddess accepted our arrangement, and we will honor our end of it by building the temple. And so it's like, you can continue to worship that god or goddess that is like your ancestral, your primary ancestral deity, and keep your temple too. But like the primary mode of worship will happen in Rome now, and will either incorporate your aspects of your rites in, depending on the arrangement we made when we did the ceremony. We will incorporate aspects of your unique specific rites into the worship of this god in Rome, or we'll just kind of keep going as we're going and keep trucking.
That makes sense. Well, and I mean, it kind of serves as like a justification for even like genocide or whatever as well, because it's like, look, we've made your patron deity has abandoned you and favors us. I'm thinking specifically because you're pointing to like Carthage, and obviously where that ends
it's not
brutal.
Pretty. No. Spoiler. Yeah, and it's actually kind of interesting because like the Roman relationship with Carthage is like, it's very infused with like a lot of like divine aspects, because the god Juno, the wife of Jupiter, was like, the Romans thought that she hated them for the longest time. Like she was venerated in Carthage, and if you remember from the Iliad, the Romans thought they were the descendants of Aeneas, and like Hera, who was Juno, had like taken the side of the Greeks against them, and had been like an ardent opponent of the Trojans, who the Romans, thought they were. Whether they were or not is a different matter. But like, it's funny to think about like going through, and then it wasn't until like they defeated Carthage, and like Carthage had been a big cultic center of Juno worship, that they kind of were like, oh, maybe she doesn't hate us anymore. So it's kind of funny to think about like going through like 600 years of your history and being like, yeah, that God fucking hates us. But yeah, I don't know. But it's just like an interesting aspect of like we would never, you know, in their incredibly polytheistic, like divided mental conception, like it's bizarre, man. Like it's just it's another world. And I think that's part of the reason why the emperor cult proved to be so necessary when the imperial era began, is that, you know, they were incorporating so many different strands of religion and worship that they were like, okay, we need to kind of organize this and like center it all around one person. And of course, that ends up being like illegitimately like a true worship of the status quo, like the state itself as divine.
And was that worship of the status quo, that you know, the imperial cult, was that oriented around like a conception of justice as well, or were those seen as separate concepts?
No, I think it was like a messy ordeal, because it kind of begins with Augustus, who says Caesar's a god, because it's like too much of a curveball, I think, for him to say, and he knew it. He can't say I'm a god, but he's saying I'm the son of a god, and you know, so worship him, and you know, it's like, oh, look who's the closest to him. So it's like, and he does that, and he also kind of allows for worship of him to take place outside of Rome, like in the East, in areas where kind of reverence of the emperor or the ruler had always been like the common practice. And so then like and the emperors are divinized after death, and it's like the last guy gets worshipped, and it takes a while for them to kind of get to the point where it's like, and they never really do get to the point where it's like the emperor, other than like Caligula or Nero, but they were a little nuts of like saying, I am a god, I am God. It was always like, I will be a god, you know, like, what's his Vespasian, and the emperor who was very involved in the destruction, or the war against the Jews. His son actually oversees the final destruction of Jerusalem. But like when he dies, he says like as a joke, he's like, "Oh, I'm becoming a god." Like those are his literal last words. But he was like apparently joking, because he was like, just. It's funny to think about, like, I'm not dying, I'm becoming a god.
Yeah. Last thought on this kind of religious side is just this popping into my head as well is, are there any deities that Rome kind of inherited from Gaul? Like from their wars against Gaul, based off of just kind of what you're describing of, like, you know, inviting deities back over?
I don't know. The Golic religious framework was like a little different. They had a system of like priests called the Druids, who were, it's very odd, because we actually don't know as much about their religion as we would like, because they didn't write anything down. It was all an oral tradition among the Druids. Okay. And so, but the Druids were kind of these holy men who could operate between tribes, and they were the grand mediators of Golic society, who would go from tribe to tribe and village to village and kind of establish unity and work out disputes between different parties. So that made them very politically influential. And so the Romans killed them all. And so we don't know a whole lot about like native Golic religion, because they didn't write anything down, and all the people who had the oral tradition memorized were murdered. So
gotcha.
Yeah, I would say it's safe to say some syncretism occurred. I just don't, and I'm sure that there are some like specialists on the area who could explain more, but it's just not an area I know a whole lot about, besides like that just sad fact that we don't know as much as we'd like.
Sure, that makes sense. And I think I was kind of blurring Gaul with more like Germanic European deities there. And
okay. And that's, again, I'm not sure. I know that the Germanic, I think they followed a similar convention with the Gauls, where they just didn't write things down. Because I know that, like, as far as like the Norse pagan stuff, like there's like the mythology that we have, but apparently, and you know, this is not my area, but I've heard that that's all kind of spurious, because it was written down by a monk who like went and like was as a missionary. So there's suspicion that he might have like Christianized certain aspects of it, or like, or maybe made some like Odin dying on a tree is like, oh, that's kind of like somebody else, you know? Like,
Youth pastor voice.
Yeah.
You know who else died on the tree?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, yeah. Again, I don't have a super deep knowledge of like the Germanic stuff.
Sure, yeah. It was just something I was curious about. I'll have to look into that and see if I can find anything. But yeah. Well, again, kind of an abrupt change here, but something else I had been wanting to ask you about was, something you had pointed to, returning to our good friend Elon Musk, his obsession with Sulla. I know it's something you've talked a little bit about, but why do you think Elon Musk likes Sulla so much? And who was Sulla? Why do fascists like him?
Yes. So yeah, Elon Musk has, believe it or not, talked out of his ass about something.
Oh my god!
It seems it's so he's spoken or tweeted at least several times about his love for a Roman dictator named Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who, if you don't know him, he's basically a figure in the generation before Caesar, who kind of wrote the playbook for how to seize one man rule in the state, and Caesar kind of was ideologically opposed to him, but ends up following his playbook like pretty closely. But the reason that Musk is, advocating for a new Sulla, which is something he said, and not a new Caesar and not a new Augustus, for example, is because Sulla was a hard reactionary who believed that basically all the problems that Rome was experiencing at his time were because the poor had too much power, and because the populace of the people it was too easy for them to make their voices heard. Like only the rich, the wealthy, the well-connected, the traditional power elite should really be in control. So he felt that way, but he also basically to achieve that, he was not shy about killing people and killing a lot of people. So he essentially, upon seizing power, he leads a violent purge of Rome that, everybody who is involved in any form of political opposition to his regime is killed. And he even kills one of his loyal lieutenants because, I think he might have sold this idea as like, oh, listen, we got to get the bad apples out, and then the Republic starts up again. And so he does when he seizes power and he's killed these scores and scores of people. He says, one of his lieutenants says, all right, well, I'm going to run for consul, the top job. And Sulla says, no, you can't. He's like, well, why not? Like, we're ideologically aligned and I've served my time. I helped you out. I want to run for the office. And Sulla has him killed. So it's not and that's somebody who you have to imagine who is on board with this entire, reactionary project, somebody who was certainly not like a secret radical, not that would have merited death or anything, but it was just like a complete control of the state that he sought. So he ends up resurrecting the office of dictator, which was a traditional Roman office, but had fallen into like obsolescence, about a century earlier. There had not been one since the Second Punic War. Okay. And so that was about over 100 years from Sulla's time to that. So he resurrects this office, and instead of the Roman convention of the dictator serving for a six-month term, he says, I'm dictator until I don't want to be dictator. I'm perpetual dictator. And so he basically has seized sole control of the state, killed all political opponents, and he does relinquish power, after he has forced through constitutional changes that will ensure the populist party remains weak permanently, and that the tribunes, the primary advocates for the poor and the working class, are neutered. He does give up power. And so a lot of people on the right kind of are trying to resurrect his image as this like George Washington type figure. He voluntarily gave up power. Like, what a great guy. And it's like, well, if you give up power, and he died like a year or two after he gave up power. So like he might have been on his last legs and just wanted to retire. I'm not going to call him a nice guy, but it's like, even if he did give up power, it's like, well, if you've killed everybody and you've taken money from thousands, and he stole the money of everybody that he killed too, is the other thing.
Yeah.
It's like, so some people who were not even politically active, they were just wealthy, were murdered so that he could have their shit. So it's like, to me, it's like, I'm not really going to give him a pat on the back, truthfully, for like giving up power. It's like, if you've done everything possible to like guarantee that your reactionary vision of the state survives in perpetuity, or at least what he thought would happen. Yeah. It's like you haven't given up power. You locked it in, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go retire to my villa, which is what he does. And then he goes and he sleeps with his boyfriend more. That's another thing that they always leave out. He was in his lifelong romantic partner. He was married like six times, but the one partner he stuck with for his entire life was a female impersonator, because the men would do the women's roles, but this was a person who only did women's roles. So we can call them, like, I don't know. I think applying like queer terms to the ancient past is like sticky, but like if somebody's sleeping with men and is embodying a woman's persona for decades, it's like, and so it's like, so Elon Musk conveniently leaves that part out, that like, that was a significant aspect of Sulla's life, but
I always leave that part out. That's crazy.
Yeah. just an all around asshole. And I have a theory that it's like Sulla is basically Pinochet for people who want to pretend they've read a book. Because it's the same political program. It's the same ideological agenda. It's the same, like, it's really the same guy.
It's just the classical version rather than
but you want to seem a little more erudite. You don't want to be gauche and say Pinochet, because that might be a little controversial.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like Pinochet, even if they're not, entirely on the left.
He's a figure that's also like being resurrected on the right, because it's like when someone says Pinochet, what they really mean is Hitler, and they just know they can't say Hitler.
Right. As like Pinochet being backed by the U.S., they can be like, haha, throwing communists out of helicopters. It's so epic.
So anyway, I think if given that outline of what Sulla was about, I don't think it takes a genius to understand why Musk has spoken positively about him, and why there's kind of like a cottage industry of like shithead reactionaries who are dedicated to kind of obfuscating that. And like I've done a couple videos on him, and there are people who are just in the comments saying like, oh, you're being unfair, he gave up power, or like, didn't they really deserve it, all the people he killed? And it's like, man, like, I don't have time for this shit. But they're out there. Like, there's no joke, there's like a very concerted effort among like pop history reactionaries to like resurrect this guy and make him into a kind of cause célèbre.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because I had often associated this with like more with Caesar, and I think it would be interesting to zoom in here of like, what were the different ideological commitments between Sulla and Caesar? Like, because you had said that Caesar, while taking power, and while kind of seeing the collapse of the Republican system into rule by one person, he had different ideological commitments, right? Yeah.
Caesar, like, Sulla tried to kill Caesar. When Caesar was young, he ran afoul of Sulla's death squads, basically, and he was put on the list of people that Sulla wanted. He wanted his head on a spike in the forum, but Caesar managed to run away and lived as a fugitive for a while. But and eventually, because he was very young and he was a member of a very well-connected family, they were able to eventually be like, listen, like, he's so young, he's just a kid, he's not really worth your time. And Sulla rescinds on the death sentence. But in doing so, when he issues the pardon, and this might not be a true story, but it's preserved in the narrative, is he says, fine, if you want me to pardon him, I will. But in this Caesar, I see many Mariuses. And Marius was Caesar's uncle, who was Sulla's great rival and a leader of the popular faction. So opposed to Sulla's like hardcore reactionary, oligarch-friendly agenda. And Sulla, I think, did he actually say that? I think it's like too perfect, Yeah. And it's like he might have been frustrated that he was kind of hemmed into pardoning the guy, but like, would he have said something that prophetic? doubtful. But anyway, it does end up coming true, and that Caesar kind of embodies Marius's vision. He is able to ascend really rapidly because so many people from the popular faction had been killed by Sulla. Mm-hmm. And he has that familial link to the great Marius, who's kind of the popular figurehead still, even though he had died, about several years before Sulla returned and started his purges. So he is kind of always tried to win power through the masses, and it's a tricky question, and it's something that kind of has plagued people of like, oh, what did he really believe? Was he being cynical, or did he actually like believe in some kind of broader vision of popular sovereignty that was more comprehensive? And I think that's tricky. There's contradictory evidence for both interpretations, but I'm kind of inclined to believe that he at least recognized that the system wasn't working and that things did need to change. And whether he viewed the populace as like a vehicle that would help him achieve that, or the justification for why the system wasn't working and the people who needed to be served, like, it's splitting hairs at this point, and everybody's way dead. So we can never really know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think like, while fascists kind of tend to pull from these Roman figures, I think you never see a perfect one-to-one parallel with how fascism is played out in the modern day, and both the examples of Sulla or Caesar. Because in Sulla, I see a lot more similarity to, like you said, like Pinochet or whatever. But I do see in Caesar kind of like Paxton's formulation of fascism, where it's like, but not a dictatorship against the left, but amidst popular approval. Popular, I'm blanking on the exact phrase Paxton uses, but there is actually a popular desire for Caesar, it seems like, at least according to the kind of propagandistic sources we have. As Sulla seems like he was completely unpopular and just kind of seizing power. So I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a whole there was like a political tendency called Caesarism, which is kind of like, it's a phrase that's kind of like fallen down by the wayside, but it essentially described like, mass dictatorship, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, dictatorship with a mandate from the people, supposedly, or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, not like one that was not reliant on repression to keep itself, like, that did actually I think you could draw parallels to Argentina, but anyway, that's out of my area, so I don't want to step too far in that direction.
Yeah, I think of a lot of, when I think of modern day Caesarism, I kind of think more of like, I'm using modern in the broad sense, but I usually think of more like Napoleon. But even then, I mean, ultimately still massacring lots of people, and
I think the Napoleon comparison is spot on, truthfully, and like Napoleon obviously would have been flattered to hear that because he loved Caesar. But yeah, like, I think it's like that thing of, it's like, I think they were both incredibly talented guys, and they were like, wait, why shouldn't, I'm like smarter than everyone else around, why shouldn't I be in charge? And it's like, now, like in our current day and age, we'd be like, well, there's proper channels that you need to go through, and like, you are smart and you are capable, but there's, you got to be open to some feedback. You're wrong sometimes. But back then it was like, in an era of like ambition and elevation of quote unquote greatness, it's like, oh no, I'm smarter than these people, I know what I'm doing, like, I'm just gonna be in charge.
Well, and I think also importantly, both of those are eras in which the proper institutional path toward that kind of role was completely illegitimate at that point.
Yeah,
Napoleon.
If to compare with Napoleon again, it's like the French Revolution had kind of cleaned out. Like he rose from a relatively obscure family like really quickly, in the same way that Caesar was able to rise really quickly because Sulla's purges had kind of decimated like that popular flank of electoral politics in Rome. Napoleon is like, during the chaos of the French Revolution, it's like, oh well, all the aristocratic officers are either fighting against us or have been guillotined. So I guess we'll let this little guy from Corsica, be in charge.
I think there's more willingness to go along with a dictator that it claims kind of a popular mandate if everything feels illegitimate. And kind of to bring us back to current events here, I think why I can hear a Trumpster in my head right now being like, well, isn't that kind of where we're at right now? That Trump seems like he's got this, like, he claims to have this popular mandate. I'm kind of setting these pins up for you to knock them down, but he's got this, popular mandate or whatever. And we're in a period where liberalism seems like it's failing. So, is Trump the American Caesar?
Yeah, I think, that's something they've kind of tried to like do even from his first term, is like set him up as like this grand world historical figure. I think
Claremont tried to explicitly call it this too, Caesarian or whatever. I might be making that up.
I think you're, I don't remember if it was Claremont or who, but like from the beginning of his kind of, since he won the election and had to be taken seriously, like, they fell in love with him, and they kind of want to venerate him as like a world historical figure, because I think that they feel like, oh well, that if it's his world and we're just living in it, that kind of gives him more leeway to maybe disregard a few norms here and there, right? And so I think it's a strategic ploy, of course. Again, a lot of really stupid people do kind of view him that way because they just eat up everything. Right. And like, but it is a claim that is made with political goals in mind, of like, oh no, we're so lucky to have him. And like, sure, he is. Oh, he may be throwing people in torture gulags, but like, do you really want to micromanage like a genius of history? Like he's our Alexander the Great. Like, who was micromanaging him, right? Yeah. So that's the reason these claims are made. But like, I don't know. I think to call him the American Caesar is like, and I'm not going to go ahead and call Caesar a perfect guy. Like, he committed a genocide in Gaul, but like, he was an incredibly intelligent, well-rounded, like Renaissance man who was in it, like a incredibly accomplished politician, incredibly accomplished general, an author, a public speaker, and like an expert in like philosophy and science, and a huge like art aficionado. So like we don't have as much of his surviving writings as we want, but like he was evidently like at the top of his field in like multiple areas. And like there's this story of him. He's going from Rome to Spain to finish the civil war, to kill Pompey's sons. The war has basically been mopped up and it's over. But in the several weeks it'll take him to get from Rome to Spain to destroy this last holdout, he writes a book called On Analogy, which is about Roman and Latin linguistics, and it's like evidently revolutionized the study of the entire language of Latin. We've lost every copy, unfortunately, but it's like he wrote that like in a carriage, like from traveling just over like a several week period, traveling from Rome to Spain, like in the middle of a war. So he was
well haven't you read The Art of the Deal? I mean,
yeah. So the natural comparison I'm gonna make is it's like. Yeah, and it's like, and Trump has not. He's got his name on a couple of books, but it's like he has not written a book. And it's like the funny thing is, it's like so it's like I love all these guys who are like, oh, Trump is the super based inheritor of like the vision of Pericles and classical Athens. It's like, dude, ask him who Pericles is. Go ask Donald Trump, like. And I'm not saying if you don't know who Pericles is, you're an idiot and you don't deserve any, like, any respect. But, like, when they build him up to be, like, this grand, like, the inevitable conclusion of the Western tradition, like this figure that all of Western history has been building towards, it's like, okay, like, could he name, like, a single French king? Period. That's on easy mode. They're all called Louis, so it's like, but like, it's like they, so he is a skilled demagogue. And I think a funny public speaker, but unfortunately like a skilled one. Like for what he does, I think he does do it well. It doesn't resonate with me, but then again, it's not supposed to. But the people who like it really like it. So I will give him credit as like he's very good at branding. He's very good at giving the people a semblance of what they feel they want. But that just makes him a good politician, in like the functional sense. Like, a good politician, but he is certainly not like accomplished across like the many areas that he would have to demonstrate like peerless excellence to like reach the level of someone like Caesar or like Alexander the Great or like these true like giants of history, right?
Well, it's interesting because like a part of me pushes back on this and is I did an episode recently on Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And so I've been thinking a lot about kind of the media ecology that we've created. And so a part of me goes like, well, in a culture that's been completely lobotomized by television and, the media environment, maybe Trump is what our Caesar would look like. But then in practice, I'm seeing in the last few months, the way in which, he seems to be bumbling his way through most of what's happening in the last few months. I think your more level-headed response there, I think, is probably correct. I mean, he's not Caesar.
I think you're right that like he is basically what happens if TV became president, because like he is like because he's senile and his brain is just his brain is Fox News, and I think that's why he's so effective at talking to his other brain melted boomers whose brain is Fox News, because he is them, right? In the same way that like Elon Musk has a diseased brain, but it's like a Twitter diseased brain. Like they're like different kinds. It's like different generations of melting your brain on nothing but right-wing propaganda for 14 hours a day, and that looks different to different people, but like. Yeah, he's good at, he understands how TV works and is good at making that medium work for him. But like he is not, but as far as like the actual, what you mentioned, the actual thing of like being president, no, he's not actually good at that.
No, he's not really good at the actual like stuff of politics or governance or whatever.
Yeah. He's good at winning the approval of the hogs and keeping the base in line, and they're using that to like keep senators and reps in line, but like he doesn't know what he's doing. And like I think part of the flailing we're seeing is that in the first term he was so constrained by he appointed guys who would have been in the White House had Rubio won, right? Like he just took your made to order Republican presidency, and that's why like his first term it was shitty, and like I wish like Hillary had won despite her massive problems. Like it was a shitty presidency the first time, but like he was more or less what a Republican had. Ted Cruz or Scott Walker, had any of them managed to win, I don't believe it would have been significantly different from what we got with him from 2016 to 2020.
Yeah, it was definitely moderate Republican with a fascist flair, and rhetoric.
Yeah, other than like him saying dumb shit and like doing dumb shit and like and sometimes funny stuff like what did he do to you still believe in Santa because like at 8 it's marginal or whatever that like that you remember that quote, right? Like
some amazing Trumpisms have definitely entered our lexicon
that will live in my brain until the day I die, because and like some dumb and like staring at the sun during the eclipse just like weird things that like Rubio would not have done any of that, but like the actual policy output, I feel like would have been 95% similar. Granted, January 6th wouldn't have happened, I think, under a quote unquote typical Republican. But that's kind of your turning point for like, now we have Trump too, where it's like everybody in the building is a true freak. And like, and like they're the people they're the freaks who couldn't even get work in like the freak house that is the GOP, right? Like they're the guys who think about age of consent a little too much even for your typical Republican, right? Like your average Republican is only thinking about that like 2 hours a day. These guys are like dialed in to like 9 or 10 hours a day of like age of consent laws are unjust.
It is a full-time job to be thinking about age of consent laws.
Yeah, if you want to be in the Trump White House, that's priority number one.
Yeah, well, I think I think that's ultimately right because I think what's definitely different about this time around with Trump is the extent to which it feels like Trump is kind of sundowning, and he's got a lot of the world's craziest people that have rallied around him in the last 4 years now kind of running the show, as we see in like in a figure like Elon Musk, as we've mentioned.
Right. Yeah, and that's like, I mean, and just to kind of bring it full circle, like if that's not like now we're at like dying empire, if that makes sense. Like it's like, because I think we're kind of blending the two together where it's like oh, the republic is collapsing into like this authoritarian monstrosity, which like I think is certainly happening and is not unfair to say by any stretch. Given what's happened to so many of like immigrants and like, pro-Palestinian protesters and things like that. But it's also like, I also feel like we're at the death of the empire of like the American empire, because it's like, it's just a madhouse. People are just, everybody is just trying to game the system to get what they can while the getting's good before like the entire edifice collapses. And the whole time, like, China is just like, all right, when do you guys clock out? Like, we want to be global hegemon. Like, can y'all wrap this up? Like, it's our turn.
Yeah. I think that's definitely. I think that's. Yeah. I mean, it kind of comes back to like, what we were talking about here is this is the U.S. the Republic or the Empire? The answer is like kind of both, and the end is going to have flavors of both.
And it's funny, and I think like. It's unfortunate, but it's also like I can't say we don't deserve it. Like I mean, like let me clarify.
We deserve to make our way to the periphery.
I don't think the people who suffer under Trumpism, even if they fucking voted for him, I don't think they deserve like to have the fascist boot that's being placed on their necks. But like, does the American empire, as it were, deserve to collapse in an incredibly embarrassing way? Like, we've done enough bad shit across the world to merit that, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. Yeah. Well, I think we're good to move toward wrapping up here. Obviously Tribunate, but anything you want to plug before we end here?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed coming on. It was a fun discussion, and I think we covered a lot of ground. But it's like the same threads reemerging time and time again. And I would just say if you're interested, my YouTube channel explores some of these topics in detail, just particularly related to Rome, but exploring them through a lens that I think you don't have to work particularly hard to see the modern application. So I'm not trying to like distort history to like make it fit a modern narrative, but I'm just trying to carefully choose topics that I think there's some prevailing application to certain I'll choose a certain incident or certain moment in history that I feel like has some sort of valence to the modern world. So
absolutely.
Check it out. It's fun.
Yeah, definitely. As I've said, I highly recommend it. It's a great YouTube channel. So, and again, one of the few Roman history channels you find that there is no Hitlerism going on.
Yeah. So. If you're interested in, and it's trying to be a little more elevated than your typical great man history, but I also really do want to work to keep it accessible. So if you're not super well versed in it, I try to make it as open and welcoming to folks who are maybe, if you're just interested in the political side of it, if you're well versed in like leftist theory and ideas, then you'll still get a lot out of it because you'll see that undercurrent and be like, wow, historical materialism. It was true then. It's true now.
Yeah. Yeah, not to mention, people paying for the like whatever YouTube membership. I'm not sure what that's called now, but you've got like a lot of good videos that do kind of touch up on current events in a more direct way. So.
Yeah. I do the just so that my the Marxist approach can stay a little subtle. I do have some paywalled stuff that's behind like the membership tier that is like directly related to like modern political affairs. Obviously, there's typically a Rome tie-in that I'll leap off from, but it is kind of lets me speak a little bit more freely.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time. Would love to do it again.
Absolutely. We definitely should. Hey, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out with the algorithm. And if you really like what you heard, consider supporting the show on Patreon. And hey, one of the benefits of supporting this show on Patreon is that you get your name read out at the end of every episode. So, without further ado, this episode is brought to you by our lovely patrons, who include Avakai Brodagam, I Drink Corn Syrup Yum, I Am Once Again, Leah Zachary Dickinson, Philip Cozy, Vita Breva, Attention Francis, Caleb Butler, Derek Hale, Gavin Aronson, Josh Christensen, Kyle Gannis, Mitchell McKinley, Moss, Nathan Thiessen, please don't read my name out loud, I'm painfully shy, Randy Sutton, Regular Sized Horse, parentheses, small, Robert Eilman, Stephen aka Spike Stonehand, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, Vicky Sutton, and of course, Chris Barker. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode.